I am excited to talk about Cartoon Network because this is something that I started watching over 20 years ago.
Same.
When I was younger, I would watch Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, Disney Channel, and that was it. I am not exaggerating when I say that either. The TV in my room actually had this weird setting where you could program it to skip channels when hitting the channel up and channel down buttons. I imagine it was intended to skip the ones that had a bad signal.
I miss
or
old
were in a
TV,
different
dude.
language or something, but
Old
I used it to
Nickelodeon, old
eliminate
Disney,
every
old Cartoon
channel
Network.
except those three. For years, I don't think a
Just like flicking through the channels to see what was on, like watching Romeo, then skipping to Disney to watch like fucking That's So Raven or something, or Wizards or Waverly Place, and then going to Cartoon Network to watch like Dexter and shit. Oh man, those were the days when Cartoon Network was good, and back then we didn't know how good it was. Like we enjoyed it, but we didn't enjoy it enough, you know what I mean? Like it was, back then we were like flicking through the channels hoping for something good, you know what I mean? We didn't realize how good we had it when it was there. But I mean, I did realize, like, back in the day when we had Saturday morning cartoons, like, man, I miss all that. Like that, we just sat there and watched whatever the fuck was on, because we only had channel 7, 9, or 10 here, or ABC Kids. But we had good channels, and we still do. Australia actually is one of, like, the rare places where you can still have, like, good TV. Like, not good TV, but ABC Kids is still decent. Like, it's not the greatest, but it's alright. And Channel 10 has a retro cartoons that literally has, like, Courage, Dexter's, Powerpuff Girls, Rocket Power, like, all of them. It's fucking nuts.
day went by where I didn't watch
like, we've actually got it here. It's not actually broadcasted on TV, I don't think, but
to talk about
you
this.
can get access
I started watching, I guess, in the mid to late 90s, but the channel does go back to 1992. It was the end result of some unconventional deals.
And whenever I need my fix, I just go and watch it. I just wish we had better TV, though.
If you're not familiar with Ted Turner, he was a big part of shaping.
Like, man, I miss the good. You know, the good. Just good cartoons, good TV. TV was actually fun to watch. Now it's just boring.
The cable television industry into what it is today. The channel TNT stands for Turner Network Television. The channel TBS stands for Turner Broadcasting System. Well,
like, bro, any of these channels, Disney, Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, could all just broadcast they literally could just rebroadcast. Like, if they have the block from the year 2000 to like 2012 or 2010 or 2000 and who cares, but yeah, that whole block of just all the broadcasting, and they just play that for the next 10 years on their channels, bro, I'd watch the fuck out of that.
In 1980, he started CNN, the first network dedicated to 24-hour news coverage. It was a pioneering new idea that helped prove the sustainability of a non-stop single-focused channel. So in 1992, he set out to try it again, but this time instead of a news network, it would be a cartoon network. The reason he chose to focus on cartoons is because over the past few years, he had acquired the rights to a tremendous amount of them. The owners of all these classic cartoons kept buying and selling them, so it gets a little tricky to follow, but they were slowly consolidating together. See, in 1956, Warner Brothers sold the rights to all of their Looney Tunes cartoons that were created before 1948. You know, all of the ones featuring Bugs Bunny and the gang, and then 2 years later, United Artists bought that company. Then in 1981,
this was like before
MGM bought United Artists.
This was before like the golden era. Like, this is where Cartoon Network started, and then all this went to Boomerang,
which were added to their existing library of MGM cartoons. It gets trickier because 5 years later, Ted Turner purchased all of it.
Think about it now. Like, back then, remember, it started like this, all those things, and then they went to Boomerang. And you would have thought, like, Cartoon Network, all the years that we enjoyed, you'd think that that would be Boomerang now, you know what I mean? Like, after Boomerang's evolved from Bugs Bunny to, like, the Speed Racer shit, and it had that while we were growing up, why didn't it just... everything from Cartoon Network just migrate over to Boomerang, and then Boomerang became our, you know, like, instead of it being like, because technically back in the day we looked at Boomerang as like the channel that was for like you were a bit older than us, you know what I mean? Like, you were before us, like you were the 80s, and you saw like Speed Racer, all the good Looney Tunes and all that shit. And then you would have thought like Cartoon Network would have just put all the stuff that we watched on Cartoon Network onto Boomerang after that, and put, you know, when they did Gumball and shit, and all the new shit for all the new kids, and then we had Boomerang, but they didn't even do that. They just ruined Boomerang too, and just, oh man.
MGM, the studio and the archives, then a few months later
Like
sold
WB
it right
Kids,
back, but held
Kids
on to
WB,
the archives.
Disney, Saturday
His main
Disney,
motivation behind all of this in the first place was likely
Tsunami,
to get the rights
Jetix.
of all the MGM
Oh my
UA
god, there was so
movies
many
that
good
he could
ones.
show on his other networks.
Disney
But the
Playhouse,
cartoons
like when it
came
was
with
actually
it.
not
Then in
like
1991, he added to
kindergarten.
that already strong collection when his company bought Hanna-Barbera for $320
Cheese
million.
TV if you were from Australia in the mornings.
So the result
We
of
had Cheese
all these
TV in the
deals
morning,
was
like
Ted Turner.
we didn't just have Saturday morning cartoons and shit like that. We had on Channel 10, there was this thing at 6 or 5 or 6 to 8 in the morning or 9, just before school. And it was just Dragon Ball Z, like, and all that shit for like an hour or two before you went to school. And you woke up every morning watching that. Oh, man.
Possessing the rights to an unheard of library of cartoons. It included all of the Looney Tunes made before 1948. Tom and Jerry, Popeye made his way into there. With Hanna-Barbera, he added the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Scooby-Doo, among many others.
See, there was another cartoon library. We got
Man, I miss all this.
The Warner Brothers pre-50 cartoons.
I miss all this so
Can you imagine owning
much.
so many cartoons that you actually forgot that you owned all of the early Looney Tunes? My gosh, the collection was estimated to be approaching 9,000 hours. And as if that wasn't enough, in 1996, Turner Broadcasting itself was bought by Time Warner, who is still the owner of the post-1948 Warner Cartoons, meaning that full cartoon library was brought together for the first time in about 40 years. But going back to 1992, Ted Turner owned all of these cartoons and created the perfect outlet for them on October 1st when he launched the Cartoon Network. I really like this. The first thing that they showed was Droopy, a character that they had acquired from the MGM library, welcoming us to the...
Someone needs to make like a video on Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and Disney. All three powerhouses back from the day, like the good days in the 2000s. And what happened, why we're never going to get that back. And why Saturday morning cartoons disappeared. Why all the good cartoon shows and channel things disappeared. They just... Man...
the network and guiding us around.
Welcome to the world's first and only Cartoon Network.
It was then followed by an old Bugs Bunny cartoon that they had acquired from the Warner Brothers library, and is it hard to see why they were successful? In addition to the collection of cartoons, creative structuring, and the innovative 24-hour format, the Cartoon Network was also propelled forward using Ted Turner's other channels, specifically TNT. They would get grouped together into the cable packages people would buy. The two are commonly marketed together, and they would even
I don't know why they don't just nowadays just literally broadcast all the old stuff on Twitch. Like, that's the future. Whether you like it or not, cable's dead. Just broadcast on Twitch. Let people subscribe to you. Bro, I would subscribe. If you actually started broadcasting on Twitch for free and had good shit, I would fucking subscribe to your Cartoon Network, Disney, and fucking Nick. But...
overlap the channels by sometimes literally
we'd never get all the
TNT
good stuff back
into the Cartoon Network. In the beginning, the programming that they showed was all unoriginal from these previous libraries, but after only a few years, they started producing original content. I would consider it a slower start with the Moxie Show, followed by Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Slow.
I mean, taking a former Hanna-Barbera superhero
this was
and having
banger.
him host a fictional late-night talk show is an original idea that you have to respect, but it wasn't
This was
a
iconic.
huge investment and didn't have a huge impact on the channel overall. Easily, the show that was most responsible for transforming Cartoon Network into the channel that we all know was What a Cartoon. It was a series of shorts made by different creators that led to the creation of some of Cartoon Network's most iconic
Courage,
shows.
Dexter.
Oddly enough, they even aired an early, much cleaner predecessor,
I remember
Family
this.
Guy. But what I'm talking
Johnny
about
Bravo.
here is Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, Courage the Cowardly Dog, the Powerpuff Girls, and my personal favorite, Dexter's
And Ed and
Laboratory.
Eddie, don't
You know,
forget.
while I'm talking about these cartoons, here's something that I just learned that blew my mind. In the show The Powerpuff Girls, you know that narrator?
The city of Townsville.
That is Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob and a ton of
I'm
other
pretty
things,
sure I knew
including
that.
the mayor on the Powerpuff Girls. That was surprising, but back to the network. For me,
I'm pretty sure I
the
knew
height of
that.
the network will forever be Cartoon
Friday,
Fridays. That was
yeah.
the night Double D or Johnny Bravo or one of the other cartoons as they were called would host a night of cartoons.
Sheep in the
You know,
big
I'm saying
city,
cartoon
oh my
a lot
God.
now, but this cartoons
That's
era
like
was
one
when
that
the
no one
network
ever
jumped in
mentions.
popularity,
That
growing
was
by as
such a
much
good
as
show.
30% a year, now seen by over 80 million people. And more importantly, it's where they found their identity. This is when Cartoon Network became something more than just a place to show old cartoons. It became something original. So, somewhat ironically, as the cartoons were becoming the new focus of the channel, they started phasing out their older cartoons that they had spent so much money to obtain and had been the original motivation to start the network. In the year 2000, they started a new network called Boomerang, where they would air all of these
Yeah.
classic cartoons, 24 hours
So
a day.
you'd think
essentially
Boomerang would
making it
be
very similar to the original
what we
vision
watched on
of
Cartoon Network now, but it's not.
In 2001, they started Adult Swim,
Aye,
which as a 10-year-old,
yo.
I would absolutely hate. Every
Yeah.
Sunday night, they would air this thing.
Nah, I love this though. All kids
I am
out of the
still
pool.
conditioned to dislike that sound because it meant that the cartoons were done for the day.
Because for me, on Foxtel, we had Foxtel in Australia and Optus, but it was Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, Disney, and then it was Fox 8, Comedy Channel, MTV, VH1. They were all good to watch, and then sometimes you went to like TLC for like the tattoo shows or the food shows, and then you went to like Discovery for like Doomsday Preppers later on, and like all the cool shows like that, and the car ones. Like that was it. They were all the good shit. Like Doomsday Preppers, when that left, that was where cable TV just went down. Like I remember watching Doomsday Preppers every week on Discovery. Oh my God. There was some really good other channels, but now everything is just shit.
And it was essentially time to go to bed. I didn't watch them at the time, but they did air many successful shows, and later on even played a big part in bringing back shows like.
And we didn't have, that's the thing, we didn't have Adult Swim. We had, Comedy Channel was technically our Adult Swim. And it had like Futurama, South Park, all that shit.
Futurama and Family Guy. Alright, I want to talk about some potential falls and rises, but it gets tricky, because with a creative network like this, how do you possibly quantify these fluctuations, or even prove that they exist? As far as I can tell, even the viewers are divided. Firsthand, on this channel, I see comments talking about how they fell and came back, and just some praising the network. It's hard to know.
I was thinking about it, and like, kind of like nowadays, it's not the same. It's a lot more saturated with like one show. But if you kind of think about it, like the way that Disney and Cartoon Network and Nick are these days, as much as it sucks for us, it's kind of got cartoons for the new generation that if we were younger, we'd probably actually enjoy. We just don't, because we're so used to all the other ones and we know how good it used to be. But like even some of them, like Gumball's alright. I don't watch it, but it's alright. And yeah, and I mean, oh fuck, see, for me it was like Nickelodeon back in the day. Nickelodeon was the best because we had Romeo, we had everything. And then Cartoon Network did overtake for a bit when Nickelodeon started airing SpongeBob a bit more. But we had iCarly, Victorious, that's what I mean. Like, it was so good. Disney Channel was good. Honestly, Disney Channel was one of the ones back then that didn't have much bad things on. You know what I mean? Had like Wizards of Waverly Place, Jessie, Sweet Life on Deck, like all those good shows, and then the animated ones which were good too, like Stanley and shit, but they didn't really push much of that.
Know what to make of it, but it appears
They were all good
that
in
the
their own
general
way.
Perception is that they started to fall soon after that cartoon.
Like if I was my age now back then, I'd be watching all three channels that from back then. Like back then when I was skipping through, I'd be watching all three of those channels just simultaneously now because they're all we missed out.
Here in the mid
We didn't know how good we had it.
reached an all-time low toward the end of that decade.
Yeah,
and started
2010.
somewhat of a renaissance around 2010. You may disagree with that, but I think
The
that's
Rise
how
Again would have
most
been for
people see
younger
it, and
kids,
that timeline
but
does
around
make
there is
sense.
when it
When
died,
searching
yeah.
for reasons behind the fall,
2010
we can look at
to
some major
12.
changes around that time. And how about the 2000 merger
Or
between
2008
Time Warner and AOL?
or
It was actually
9.
the biggest
Like those
merger
years
ever
where
and a
they started
complete
having more Ben
disaster. So
10.
there's many ways that
Because
this
I
could
wasn't a
have
fan of
affected
Ben
the
10 back then. Even now, I'm still not much of a fan. Like the old one was good, but they started ODing it with like the new one around there.
network. They changed up Hanna-Barbera Productions, for example, but the big one I'm looking at here is the resignation of Betty Cohen. She was the president of Cartoon Network going back to the beginning 9 years earlier, and it was under her control where I first found that I believe involved creating content. Did make some changes, not necessarily rebranding. By 2004, they had stopped using the name Cartoon and changed their logo for the first time ever. They kind of isolated the
Like some of this was alright, but then it fell off.
together. It's hard to say. Cartoon series were coming to an end.
And Codename
Should
Kid Next
Foster's Home
Door,
for Imaginary
Foster's,
Friends.
yeah.
Gosh, the titles really got longer. Again,
No,
I'm
but
not
these
here
were
to
good
review the
shows.
and say what was good and what was bad, but they weren't the originals, and because of that, I imagine many of the people, including myself, didn't make that transition and respond to them in the same way. Or even if they did, by 2009, all of those shows were done as well, along with Ed, Edd and
Yeah,
Eddy,
see,
and that was what
2009.
many
By 2009, see what I mean? 2009-10 was when it fell off.
considered to be their lowest point.
When they stopped
Another
airing
reason for their
Foster's, that was when they started airing Ben 10 a lot more with some Codename Kids Next Door on the side.
decline is all
And
of
it was
the
alright,
live
but
action stuff. In
you could see it
2009,
was
they
dying.
introduced CN Real.
And then you had some days where it was good with like other shit, but then yeah.
It was a programming block filled with all of these live-action reality shows. Their competitors like Nickelodeon and
But
Disney.
man, Cartoon Network, as weird as it is, I didn't grow up on Cartoon Network, but Cartoon Network, well, my friend had it most of our lives, and Cartoon Network was where every like the night where they would have the anime section where like Dragon Ball Z would play and then Naruto, and we would all just sit there and watch the new episode of Naruto. It was so good. I remember one night we were watching it, and it was back I think when the maze game came around, when the scary maze game came around, and I was on my phone and I showed it to my friend's little brother and he was watching it, and then when the face popped up, he's like, huh? Ah! And starts screaming, and it was so funny.
Disney Channel had live-action shows, so I guess that this was their attempt to tap into that audience, but it didn't go well. The show
That's the thing, we didn't watch Cartoon Network for the live action, we watched Cartoon Network for the cartoons. We watched Disney Channel for the live action with a bit of cartoons, and we watched Nickelodeon for both.
received poor reviews, and even if the shows were decent enough, I don't think the audience would have responded very well to them.
Because Nickelodeon
They
was one of the
decided to
rare
call the
places
channel
where we actually enjoyed watching the Kids' Choice Awards.
Cartoon
Every
Network.
year, it was
I think
hype.
that pretty much cut out any potential for
But now it's
live-action
just, yeah.
shows. It's an easy criticism to say that Cartoon Network, many would argue they were looking much worse. But I say that was their lowest point because in 2010, they started making some major changes.
But then they kind of saved it with Regular Show and Adult Swim, but that was legit only for a couple of years.
They canceled CN Real, introduced yet another logo, and I'd say most importantly, they started introducing
Yeah, this logo was synonymous with Adventure Time and Regular Show. Always seeing this.
And I'd say most importantly, they started introducing some well-received shows. I'm talking about The Regular Show, premiering in 2010, Adventure Time, premiering that same year, The Amazing World of Gumball the following year,
I didn't like-
Steven Universe, and Teen Titans Go
Yeah, I
2
didn't like
years
these.
later. They may have overdone it with Teen Titans Go, but many would agree.
And that's the thing,
That
Cartoon Network now is literally Teen Titans Go, Craig of the Creek.
lineup was a considerable improvement. You
Like,
know,
yeah, for kids, it's probably good, but for us, it's like, bro, we had 50 different shows every
it really
day.
seems that every time we
Like,
enter
you had Ben 10, Codename, you had a bit of Dexter's and Johnny Bravo, like, everything, they had different shit in the morning, afternoon, and night.
into a new decade,
And then, like, with anime, too, like,
Cartoon Network starts reinventing themselves. I say that now because most of those shows have ended over the past few years, and Time Warner was acquired by AT&T over that time, which will likely lead to more changes. So it's hard to say what Cartoon Network will look like over the next decade, but I bet it will be different. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about Cartoon Network over the years? As I said, those
with all the reboots, it's looking kind of promising, but I mean, I just miss the old stuff. I miss the whole thing. Like, I miss the ads. I miss everything. I miss the mid-roll things. Everything was so good.
Cartoon Fridays
We
were
didn't realize how good it was when it was there. We just hated it. We hated, it's ads. But the ads are so nostalgic now.
the peak for me. So what would
Like,
you...
the ads were part of it, as much as a lot of us hated it. That's why, like, I hate ads now, but back then, if I was, watching, I wouldn't have my ad blockers and
you
stuff
consider
on.
to be their best era?
So
Maybe you
good.
were a fan of, dude, what would happen back in 2009? I think you'd be in the minority, but it's possible.
Like, the reason I don't really consider Cartoon Network, even though when Regular Show and Adventure Time and Gumball came, I didn't watch Gumball. The reason Adventure Time and Regular Show I didn't really consider Cartoon Network is because that was when I evolved to watching just shit online. So whenever the new episode came out, I just downloaded the new episode and watched it on my computer. I never watched it on Cartoon Network or... So that's why, like, Gumball never spoke out to me and I never watched it. I probably should have. There's obviously a lot of funny stuff that I've seen, and I've seen episodes, and it is, like, I can sit there and watch it. But I never really got into that one as much as I did for Regular Show and Adventure Time for their stories and stuff like that. Because that was when I was getting older into more, mature shit. So it still worked. Like, it was still, the kid in me, but then it gave me a bit of taste of, like, a story. Even though it wasn't really cohesive in both shows. Like, it eventually did, yeah. But, man, I miss the old days of just opening up Cartoon Network, Disney, Nickelodeon, MTV, and all that shit. Just checking through all the channels to see what was good to watch. And then Saturdays because that's the thing, like when I was at my mate's house, I was doing that. But some days, like when it was World Cup year and World Cup was on, I was able to weasel my mum into getting it a bit early, and we had Foxtel for a couple months and shit. Or a year or so. But like, yeah, I didn't have it all the time. But fuck, going to my mates and watching them all, going to my cousins and watching, because my cousin had it and we would always go there, and that's where I remember Romeo and shit. Because I was always at her house, just sitting on Foxtel. And then when it was at home, it was Cheese TV in the mornings. At night, it was ABC Kids. Or ABC 3 later on. They were actually good with cartoons. And then it was like Channel 7, 9, and 10 on Saturdays for cartoons. Sometimes on Sundays too, if you were lucky in the mornings. Like, yeah, we had some good shit. There's this one show that I remember watching on Saturday mornings. It was about this brother and sister or something, or a family that owned like this. They owned like this building. This like, not a holiday, it was like a resort, but it was like a bamboo, hand-built kind of, not hand-built, but like more low-tech, right? It was still a normal place that was a house, blah, blah, blah. It was just, and then the reason I'm saying that is compared is because there was a competing resort that was a fucking skyscraper like building, like a proper building, where this place was like, it had like the normal stuff, but it was like bamboo sticking up. Like, I wish I could remember the show. Like, it was more like a, I don't know. How do I look it up? Resort. It was more like this kind of resort, right? It was more like this kind of resort where the roofs were like this, but like the insides and the buildings were like the way that it was built, like a proper building, was nice, and it was a proper building. And then you had like the enemy, which was going against them, which was like one of these kind of places. And they were trying to compete, but I don't remember the cartoon. Like, kind of like that. Like, this would be like the house, and then the resort was like, yeah. Like this kind of. Like this kind of place, and then they were competing with like this kind of place. And it was on Channel 9's, but I don't remember what it was.
I've had so much fun talking about all of these old Cartoon Network shows.
I remember watching it every week because it was so good.
I have to ask you this. Do you remember this commercial where Fred is looking...
Like where the brother and sister were part of this house, and then the enemy was a girl. And they always like went through competitions.
for a parking spot. I think that they must have showed this thing excessively because I still have that thing memorized. Alright, so any thoughts you have about Cartoon Network or the cartoons on the network, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Can no leader go undated?
Thank you for watching.
Like, even just watching that little bit just gives me the feel like, I miss cable TV.